Welcome student to massive open online course on Indian economy. Present module entitled International Comparison Program ICP India vis-a-vis other countries. After completing this module, you are able to learn the background of International Comparison Program, as well as it also helpful to understand the methodology of ICP, and the module also help you to know how ICP is effective to compare different economic indicators across different regions as well as countries in the globe. Present module consists with 5 sections. Section 1 introduces the background of the ICP. Section 2 deals with the historical development of International Comparison Program, whereas Section 3 describes the basic methodologies which are used in the ICP, and Section 4 is actually describes the comparative assessment of different countries in respect of different indicators under ICP. And finally, Section 5 makes some concluding observations. This International Comparison Program ICP is the world's largest initiative or statistical initiative. First, it was introduced to measure the GDP across different countries, and this initiative was important because every country measures its GDP by its own currency. Say India measures its GDP by Indian rupee, whereas USA measures its GDP by the dollar. In case of England, it measures by pound. Therefore, we are not able to compare the volume of GDP, which is the important indicator for the economic progress across different countries or across different regions. Therefore, this initiative is very, very important, that helps us to compare the volume of GDP and its component like consumption expenditure, government expenditure, gross fixed capital formation across different countries of the world, and as well as we will be able to understand the position of different countries in the development ladder. And this particular program set up to fulfill two important objectives, two basic objectives. These objectives are to produce purchasing power parities and comparable price level index for participating economies, and to convert the volume and per capita measures of gross domestic product and its expenditure components into a common currency using PPPs, purchasing power parities. That is, this ICP measures the volume of GDP as well as its component in a specific currency which is called purchasing power parity currency, and first task is to develop the price level index of different countries to measure these purchasing power parities. Now we come to the historical development of ICP, International Comparison Program. It was first established in the year 1968, and it was the joint venture of United Nations Statistical Divisions, UNSD, and International Comparison Unit of the University of Pennsylvania, with financial support from the Ford Foundation and the World Bank. And obviously, the primary objective of this initiative was to compare the GDP across different countries in two specific measures. One is production method and another is the expenditure method. But till now, this method is only, or this initiative is only able to measure the GDP on the basis of the expenditure method, not on the basis of the production method. And after 1968, there were different cycles of ICP to measure the GDP and its component across participating countries. Therefore, the number of countries are not uniform across different cycles. And if we noticed the initiative taken by the ICP, then after 1968, the next cycle was in the year 1970, thereafter 1973, 1975, 1980, 1985, 1993, 2005, 2011 and 2017. And in these different cycles, the number of participating countries also increased gradually. At the early years, in the 1970s, the number of participating countries were only 10, which gradually increased to 146 in the year 2005. And in the year 2011, the number of participating countries were maximum 199. But in the latest year, in 2017, number of participating countries were 176. India participated in this initiative, in this ICP, International Comparison Program, since 1985. Not only that, there are some milestone of the ICP. In the year 1993, all regions of the world were covered for the first time, but no global comparison were made. Therefore, UNSC reviewed the methodology of ICP, and the World Bank proposed a new strategy to address the constraint of the measurement, and they also prescribed how we can improve the methodology of the ICP that are helpful to measure or to compare the GDP across countries. And this ICP 2005 is very effective because it produced the estimates of the relative price level of GDP and its different aggregates for the 1946 economies, and this is the first time that China has participated in the ICP. Whereas in the cycle ICP 2011, with its significant expanded coverage up to 199 countries, maximum number of participating countries, has attracted wider acceptance than the previous exercises. Following the improved availability, the use of purchasing power parities has increased worldwide. Additionally, the enforcement process has improved significantly after the ICP 2005, and the ICP 2011 put the ICP on a stronger methodological footing by introducing a number of methodological innovations prescribed by the World Bank, and including the new method of integrating regional outcomes into a set of global outcomes. The ICP 2017, the latest one, was conducted for the reference year 2017 with the participating countries 176 economies, and released its report in the month May of 2020. The next ICP comparison for the reference year 2021 is currently underway. Its report is not published. Now we come to the methodology of the ICP. The basic units of the estimation of the GDP is the purchasing power parity. The purchasing power parity actually the purchasing power of different currency. The purchasing power of a particular goods of Indian rupee, as well as purchasing power of this particular amount of goods for by the American dollar makes the purchasing power parity mechanism. On the basis of the purchasing power of different currencies, ICP developed these PPPs to measure the GDP and its component across different countries. And their first task is to calculate the price level index on the basis of this purchasing power parity mechanism. After development of the price level index, their task is to measure the volume of GDP by PPPs, and this volume of GDP as well as its different components, say consumer expenditure, government expenditure, and gross fixed capital formation, also helpful to understand the relative position of different countries in the world. And to measure this purchasing power parity methodology, these ICP initiatives, they have collected expenditure data as well as data related to the price level. Expenditure data that reflects the GNP, because we are all aware that GNP is measured in three alternative methods. One is production method, another is income method, and third one is the expenditure method. This expenditure method of measurement of GNP is considered to calculate purchasing power parities of different countries, and in the ICP program, or in this program, they also considered the expenditure method of GDP across different countries. Therefore, their task is to collect the data of expenditure of GDP as well as its different components, and to aggregate or to compare the GDP across different countries as well as to aggregate the regional GDP with the global GDP. They have also collected the data related to the price level, which is called the price level index data. Section 4. Section 4 describes the comparison of GDP and its component by the methodology of the ICP. First of, I will discuss the share of global GDP. As per the estimation of the ICP 2017, this is the aggregate estimation of 176 countries. The global volume of output was $1,19,547 billion, which is measured in PPPs. And in case of market exchange rate, this volume was 79,715. This particular figure help us to understand the different position of different countries. In respect, here we classified the regions of the globe in respect of the income as well as in respect of the geographical location. In respect of the income, all the countries in the globe are classified into 4 groups: high income group countries, upper middle income countries, lower middle income countries, and low income countries. And for each of the countries, ICP estimated the GDP on the basis of purchasing power parities as well as on the basis of market exchange rate. Therefore, this figure help us to understand the distribution of the global GDP across different region in respect of the income as well as in respect of the different geographical location. These are the different countries classified across different geographical locations, starting from East Asia Pacific to Sub-Saharan Africa. And this particular diagram help us to understand the distribution of the global GDP, which is measured in terms of the market exchange rate, and this third diagram help us to understand the distribution of the population. Therefore, when we compare the distribution of population along with the distribution of global GDP, we can easily understand the relative position of different regions of the country in the global scale. First of all, we consider the high income countries. In case of high income countries, out of total GDP produced in India, in world, their share was 48.8%, which is measured in terms of PPP measured. And this share was 64% when GDP is measured by another methodology, which is called market exchange rate based methodology. But their share of population was only 16%. That is, only 16% of the global population are living in the high income countries, but they occupied or they produced 48.8% of the global income in PPP term and 64% of the global GDP in market exchange rate term. If we look into the upper middle income countries, then there are some parity. 35.5% people are living in this region in upper middle income group countries, and their share of GDP was 34.4%. But in case of lower middle income countries, the share of GDP was nearly 16%, whereas the share of population was 40%. The 40% of the total global population are living in the lower middle income countries, whereas they are only able to generate 16% of the total GDP. Similar disparity can also observed when we have classified the countries in respect of the geographical region. But in case of East Asia and Pacific, in this region, the parity was also maintained because their share of GDP was 31%, as well as the share of population was 31.5%. But when we look into the Europe and Central Asia, they have occupied 25.8% of the total GDP, but their share of global population was only 12%. In case of Latin America and the Caribbean, the share of GDP as well as the share of population are in the same line. But when we look into sub-Saharan Africa or South Asian countries, as well as even North American countries, their share of GDP was much lower compared to their share of population. In case of sub-Saharan Africa, the share of GDP was 3.1%, whereas share of population was 14%. In case of South Asian countries, the share of GDP was 8.5%, in contrast with the share of population was nearly 24%. Therefore, this comparative assessment of the distribution of GDP is possible by the initiative of the ICP, International Comparison Program. This particular figure is effective to understand the comparison of GDP across specific countries or across different countries. Here we have classified the countries on the basis of their volume of GDP. Larger size of the triangle represents the larger volume of GDP. Side by side, the color of the triangle also varied in respect of the different region of the world. Here, these two particular countries where their size of rectangles are relatively larger, one is China and another is United States. The volume of GDP of China in the year 2017 measured by PPP was 1,96,117. Whereas in case of United States, this value was 1,95,190. That is, the GDP of China in PPP terms is higher than that of the United States. When you consider in percentage share, the China occupied 16.4% of the total GDP of the world, whereas United States occupied 16.3% of total GDP of the world. The third largest economy among the countries is the India. India's share was 8.7% and its value was 8 lakh and 518. That is, the volume of GDP in PPP term of India is less than half of the volume produced by China as well as United States. Not only that, if we taking together United States and China, then they are producing more than 1/3 of the total volume of GDP of the globe. Other countries that are having a relatively higher share of GDP are Japan 4.3%, United Kingdom, then Indonesia, then Korea, etc. Germany, the share of Germany is also relatively higher. It is 3.7%. In case of Russian Federation, the share was 3.2%. In case of United Kingdom, it is 2.5%. All these countries are in the European Union. In case of France, it is 2.5%. In case of Italy, it is 2.1%. But these countries which are belonging in the sub-Saharan Africa as well as Middle East and North American countries, their share were relatively less and less than 1% for most of the countries. If we, in case of our two neighboring countries, in Pakistan, Pakistan occupied only 0.8% of the total GDP of the world. In case of Bangladesh, the share is also relatively less compared to Pakistan. It is only 0.5%. Therefore, this is the complete picture of the relative share of GDP across different countries. This estimation of ICP help us to understand the volume of GDP produced by different countries in the world, as well as we are also able to compare the position of the countries in respect of the volume of their output. But this comparison is not possible if we consider the specific currency measure of specific countries. After discussion of the comparison of different countries in respect of the overall volume of GDP, now we can concentrate it with the components of the GDP. There are three specific components of the GDP. One is individual consumption expenditure, government expenditure, and fixed gross capital formation or gross fixed capital formation. Now we can look into the relative position of different countries in respect of these three components of GDP. This figure help us to understand the relative position of the 6 largest economy in the world in respect of the actual individual consumption, which is a component of the aggregate GDP. And in respect of the actual individual consumption, AIC, the share of United States was 18.6%, followed by China 12.2%, and India 7%, Japan 4.4%, Germany 3.6%, and Russian Federation 3.2%. These 6 countries, these 6 largest countries occupied nearly 50% of the total individual consumption in the world, and the rest of the countries, their share was 50.9%. Similarly, we can also understand the relative importance of different countries in respect of the government expenditure. This figure also help us to understand the share of the government expenditure of 6 top countries or 6 largest countries, where the share of China was 14.5%, followed by United States 11.3%, Russian Federation 5.6%, Japan 5.5%, Germany 4.2%, France 3.6%. India is not in the place of largest 6 countries, and the rest of the countries, the share of the rest of the world is 50.3%. This figure is help us to understand the percentage share of gross fixed capital formation. This gross fixed capital formation is very important ingredient for the GDP. Here the share of China was a maximum 26.4, that is more than 1/4 of the gross fixed capital formation was made by China, then the share is 26.4%, followed by United States 13.9. The share of United States is half compared to that of the China. In case of India, it is only 6.8%. If we look into the share of China and India, then there is a huge disparity in respect of the gross fixed capital formation. In case of Japan, it is 4%, Germany 3.1%, Indonesia 2.9%, and the rest of the world, other than these 6 countries, the share of gross fixed capital formation was 43%, nearly 43%. Yes, now we compared the price level index. This price level index is also very important to understand the position of the different countries, and this particular figure is multidimensional in nature. Here we can able to understand the position of the countries in respect of GDP, the position of the countries in respect of the per capita GDP, as well as the position of the country in respect of the price level index. Higher the price level index means higher cost of living. And here the size of the bubbles varies in respect of the size of the aggregate GDP of that particular country. And in the horizontal axis, we measure the GDP per capita. Therefore, the country is located, the country is the distance from the vertical axis implies higher GDP per capita, whereas the vertical axis measure the price indexes, GDP price level index. Now, here the United States, the size of the bubble is also larger, which implies that the volume of GDP is also high. Side by side, it also located relatively top right position, which implies that per capita income is also relatively high. Side by side, here cost of living is also high, because here the GDP price level index is around 160%. In case of China, the cost of living index is nearly 100%. In case of India, it is in between 40 and 60%. That is, cost of living in India is relatively lower compared to the cost of living in China, Brazil, Germany, Japan, United States, even Mexico. But the size of the bubble of India is relatively lower compared to other two countries, say United States and China, that indicate that its volume of GDP is relatively lower to compared to Brazil and United States. In conclusion, we can say that international comparison program is a very effective measurement to understand the relative position of the different countries. Therefore, this initiative help us to judge the relative position of different countries in respect of GDP and its component, as well as in respect of the cost of living index.